Welcome to the Anchored Podcast. Have you ever wondered how to stay grounded in your faith amid heartache, confusion, and a seemingly mass exodus of people leaving the faith? My name is Roseanne Dawes.
And I'm Stephanie Frankham. And we've discovered that being anchored in Jesus Christ is the key to navigating these rough waters. Join us as we explore how their faith and covenants have helped each of our guests navigate the storms of life. Welcome back to the Anchored Podcast.
We have an exciting guest with us, and his name is Lamonte John.
And Lamonte is in my ward, and I'm actually super excited to hear his story because I don't know it. I just know that he has so much light with him, and we thought it would be really fun. In fact, okay, I'll be honest. What really happened was his wife asked me to teach Relief Society, and I said, yes, if Lamonte will be on our podcast. So I took care of my part of it, and now it's Lamonte who's filling in for Bonnie. So um, yeah. So will you just tell us just a little bit about you so our listeners know who they're listening to?
Sure. Like I say, my name is Lamonte John. I'm 71 years old. I really uh, can't believe that, but then I look in the mirror every morning, see all this white hair on my head, and so I realize my argument's pretty bad. I grew up here in Malad, Idaho. My ancestors actually, my great great grandparents on both sides of my family joined the church in Wales back in the mid 1800s and came to America and then eventually ended up settling in the Malad Valley. And so I'm very proud of that. I married my high school sweetheart. Her name was Bonnie Lewis, but she's been Bonnie John for 51 and a half years, another number that is hard for me to believe. But we have four sons, and I'm the youngest of three children here. My siblings and my parents are all deceased now, and so I'm an orphan kind of. Bonnie has all of her family here, and so they've kind of adopted me. We got married very young. I was just 20 a week before the wedding, and Bonnie was still 19, and we went to school in Moscow, Idaho. I don't know if you spent any time there. It's a beautiful place to be and a great place to start your life together. We lived in the Salt Lake Valley for about 11 years. Then we moved to the East Coast for a job with the Marriott Corporation. And then I've had a number of other jobs. And in 2020, we retired. And we had some property up here that Bonnie's dad had given us 20 years ago. And so we thought, well, that's a good place to go where you get free land. And so we built a house up here, and we've been in the seventh ward for about 2.5 years.
And I have to just say, it's actually very significant that your ancestors are from Wales and that you're in the Malad Valley because that's where the ties start from, right? We have all that Welsh background.
Yeah.
What's
Right.
so fun about that, it was my father-in-law that started the Welsh Festival here in Malad.
Oh, really?
Yes,
Oh.
before he passed, and then it moved to other hands and such. And that's not even his background, but he felt so moved by the history of Malad that he wanted for the Welsh Festival to happen.
One other thing I just wanted to mention, I forgot to mention, my great great grandfather on my mother's side, he had an interesting name, William Williams Williams. He was a stonemason, and he helped to build the Logan Temple, where Bonnie and I were married 100 years later. So that was kind of cool.
Oh, that's awesome. What rich history you have. That's beautiful. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, Lamont, we're just going to turn the time over to you to share your story.
Okay. Well, I've seen some of your podcasts, and I think mine's going to be a little different. I haven't written a book, and I don't have a podcast. I've actually been trying to write a book for 28 years, but I've gotten about 3 chapters in and then start over. But anyway, um, I mentioned that my great grandparents joined the church, so I'm the fifth generation of my family in the church. But along about the third and fourth generations, people started, I guess, leaving the church, or not in a hostile way, but just decided that wasn't the life for them. Now, and I apologize for backing up. One of the things I wanted to say that I want to talk about today is first that God is a patient God, at least He has been for me, and secondly that He puts people in our path of life, and He has for me, who have made a difference, and I'll talk about some of them. And the other thing I forgot to mention, I mentioned this to Stephanie when she called me, was that I she knows when I bear my testimony, I'm a crier. So you'll see there's lots of tears. So buckle up, okay? Anyway, um, so anyway, I grew up in the church, but my parents were well, our family was active when I was a small boy. When I was about 8 years old, my mother stopped going to church, and I thought it was because she had started a job where she had this long commute and she was always tired. But I learned like 45 years later that she had been offended by a couple of women in the ward, and nobody came after her, and so she stayed home. And my brother and sister, who were just about 14 months apart, they both stopped going to church when they were about 14. So there was a time when only me and my father were going to church, and we moved to a new ward. We lived across the street from the bishop, but we didn't get a visit from the bishopric. We didn't get a visit from the Relief Society or the Young Men's Presidency. And so me and my dad thought, well, okay, this is a convenient time. Let's just stop going to church. And so for about a year, I was away from church. And then one day at school, two young men, Stephanie knows one of them, J.D. Thomas, approached me and invited me to come to what we called Mutual at the time, a young men's activity. And I guess I was just waiting for the invitation because I went with them and enjoyed myself. And I'm not sure if it was exactly the next Sunday, but shortly after that, that I started going to church again. And I've been going to church my whole life since then. I will say that when I was a teenager, an older teenager in high school, I was out on Saturday night doing some things I shouldn't have done, and I won't get into that. But I used to say I can't do enough bad on Saturday night that will keep me from church on Sunday. I don't know, somehow, even though it's kind of a hypocritical thing, I felt like I needed to be there. Well, then I met Bonnie. There used to be a kind of an unfair system, but we were the beneficiaries of it in high school. There was a journalism class. It was a senior class, but the only juniors in the class were people that the journalism instructor handpicked out of the student body to be the assistant editors of the newspaper, the assistant editors of the yearbook, and the photographer. And then when we were seniors, we moved up to that. So Bonnie and I were chosen to be the assistant editors of the newspaper, and I guess we fell in love there. We talked as friends. We were very good friends, and then I asked her out on kind of it wasn't really a date. It was kind of a bet I had with her for doing something. And I said, well, if I do this, then you're going to have to go out with me. And then I saw her the next night after the basketball game. And I said, so are you ready for tonight? She goes, are you serious? And of course I was thinking, well, she turns me down, this will be a joke, right? And I said, yeah. And she said, well, pick me up in 5 minutes. So, so we went out and stayed as girlfriend and boyfriend through our senior year. I'm not sure at what point I decided I wanted to marry Bonnie. I'm sure it was almost immediately because she's so wonderful. But um, we, I will be frank and honest with you. If I had told, if Bonnie had said to me, "I want to get married, but I don't want to get married in the temple," I would have said fine because I wasn't really there yet. But thankfully, Bonnie didn't say that. She said the opposite. If we get married, we're getting married in the temple. And so I straightened up and did all the things that I needed to get a temple recommend. Now, one of the big challenges of my life, and this is what part of God being patient with me, was paying tithing. I hadn't learned that as a boy or as a youth, and so that was a challenge for me. But I did that. I got a recommend. We got married in the temple. We went off to school. You know, when you're a college student, you're dirt poor and you don't have much money anyway. So paying tithing is easy because the amount you have to pay for tithing is almost nothing. So that was easy. But when I got out of college and started working, we moved to the Salt Lake Valley. I started working. By the way, I studied architecture. I'm a licensed architect. I started working for an architectural firm, and I was stunned at how little they pay intern architects with a 5-year professional degree. But anyway, I decided in my wisdom that we couldn't afford to pay tithing. And so we stopped paying tithing, or I stopped paying tithing for, it was over the next, I'm going to say 14 or 15 years. It was on again, off again. I would pay tithing. Sometimes I would get a temple recommend, and then eventually I would fall away and not do that. I was still going to church. I was active in the church and had callings, ones that didn't require that I have a temple recommend or whatever. We moved, and along the way, I changed jobs. Sometimes I felt the need to get more money or to be in a better situation, and it always seemed like it wasn't hard to get another job. And of course, in my mind, that was because I was so charming and intelligent, and didn't have anything to do with the Lord blessing me. But I had a chance to be in a business with two other partners in 1987, and we thought that was a great idea, and it turned out to be not a great idea, and we lost our shirts. But I applied for a job I saw in a trade journal at the Marriott Corporation, and they hired me and moved us back to the Washington, D.C. area. They're in Bethesda, Maryland, just north of the District of Columbia, and we moved to Fairfax County, Virginia, which is just across the river from Bethesda. So I worked at Marriott for a while, and then I went back to private practice for about 3 years, and then I actually lost my job. I got laid off. And it was a time when the economy was really bad, and that's one of the issues about being an architect. It's kind of feast or famine with the economy. But I lost my job, and it's I'm ashamed to say that it took that. We were 2,500 miles from anybody that, any of our family, and we had a telephone and all that, but it just seemed like we were out there on our own. And it took that tragedy in my life to say, I need to pay my tithing. I had been given a severance package, and I had actually been given a yearly bonus from my firm before I left, and so we had some money. But it was 9 months before I got a steady job. And if you saw my checks that I wrote out for tithing during that time, you'd see that the handwriting was a little shaky because I wasn't sure whether we were going to be able to put food on the table the next week. But eventually I got maybe the best job I've ever had at the University of Maryland at Baltimore in their facilities group. And I won't get into why, but just learning the whole process from cradle to grave of building a project and turning it over for the people that operate it.
Lamonte, I'm curious about, here you are writing these shaky-handed checks, not knowing if they're going to bounce or what. Did the Lord always show up for you to put food on the table?
Absolutely. I should have said that I would write the check and then somebody would call me, and they weren't big, huge jobs. I was doing these little side jobs working out of my basement, and somebody would call me and say, can you do this for me? There was a point where it was Bonnie's birthday and I was out of work. A client that I'd worked with in the firm I left kept giving me some work on the side. And then he told me that his brother owned this limousine company and they needed some space planning work done. And so I went up to their office and I asked the guy, I said, hey, what's the cost to rent a limousine for the night? And he says, well, it's like $250, but we barter. And so I traded him. And so for Bonnie's birthday, we got to go out with some friends in a limousine and cruise town and go out to dinner and stuff like that. So, life was pretty good, and God looked after us during that time.
I love about these miracles that just happen, because there's just so many right now that are going through this experience that I'm hearing, and it's just part of this miraculous story. Like there's a lesson the Heavenly Father's trying to teach us. And I remember, gosh, this is before I moved up to the Salt Lake Valley 6.5 years ago. I remember just thinking, I don't understand. Like, I didn't understand it. No, I go to work, I bring home the paycheck. This is me. I don't understand. I mean, I'm told that it's all God, but I don't feel that. I don't understand that. And so I remember just saying that pretty much out loud. I don't know how this is you. And then God, in his mercy, shown me over and over and over that he provides in these miraculous ways over and over and over. Not to say that it's not stressful in the meantime when you're there again and you're just experiencing that and you're just waiting on the Lord. Like there's patience that I have to practice. And but yet when we look back, it's those stories that you're talking about that he does show up.
And then a year after I made the commitment, and it was finally a commitment to pay tithing and to be living all the commandments. um, I was called to serve in the bishopric of our ward. One of the counselors moved to a new ward and they needed a new counselor, and so I was called to be the second counselor. And 2 years after that, our bishop took a business opportunity, moved his family to South Florida, and so I became the bishop. And I didn't I didn't realize it until it was all over and I was released. But I tell everybody that being the bishop is the best calling in the church, and for a variety of reasons. You know, there's a time commitment, but I learned about time commitments when I was an architecture student, and you lived at the building to get your projects done. So that wasn't a problem. Uh, there are tragic situations and challenging situations that you deal with people with, and those are challenging, but ultimately they're a blessing. Um, when you can um, help someone through those times and make life better for them. But ultimately, the best part of being the bishop is that you get to be part of everybody else's joyful experiences, weddings and babies and going on missions and all the things that where people are happy. You're there because you're the bishop. Sometimes I would be there because I was their friend, but uh, more times than not, it was because I was the bishop, and it was so great um, to be part of that. And I just think of those, and you know, I've only thought of this recently that um, being called as the bishop was God um, being patient with me all those years of thinking I was the one behind all the great blessings, and you know, not giving him credit and doing all the things that I did. And finally, when I said, "It's up to you," he he blessed my life with that. So that's, you know, uh, Stephanie can tell you. Sometimes I bear my testimony and talk about how um, how slow I am to get it. I talked about recently about getting my patriarchal. I was 34 years old when I got my patriarchal blessing. I didn't do that as a young man, but the patriarch blessed me that I would be responsible for family reunions. Now, this was a week before we moved to Virginia, where I was going to be 2,500 miles from anybody in my family. And so I thought, why would he put that burden on me? But I've come to understand, since my family members have been deceased, that maybe the family reunion he was talking about was not at the park with a bucket of chicken, it was in the eternity. And so we've done all the my older sister died a couple of years ago, and Bonnie was able to do her endowment a few months back, and we need to have her sealed to my parents. But we've done all the other temple work for my brother and my parents and all that. So I finally got it, you know, instead of worrying about that. But he has shown up in so many ways at a time of need. When I was in the bishopric, but our second son, Christian, he was about to graduate from high school. Well, maybe he already had graduated, and he was headed down a long, dark road, the wrong road. And it wasn't just a matter of not coming to church. It was a matter of, um, you know, turning his back on everything we had taught him about how to live. He would leave home with his friends and sometimes not come home for 2 or 3 days. And and then when he would come home, we'd want to confront him about it, and he didn't want. He could lock himself in his room and didn't want to talk about it. And it was challenging in our house. And Bonnie and I, you know, I don't know if we argued, we discussed it a lot, and we finally came to the conclusion that um, if we kicked him out of the house, which was one of the thoughts, that we would lose all influence over him. And so we decided to set some rules, and we sat down with him and said, you know, I mean, we were concerned about his example to his two younger brothers at that point. His older brother had left home and was either on a mission or had gotten married sometime after that. And so, um, and so we sat down and set some rules and said, you know, when you're home, this is what you can and can't do and whatnot. And we had to revisit that several times. But anyway, I was in the bishopric. We had a friend named Steve who was the uh, uh, executive secretary for the bishop. And Steve's about 14 years older than us, but his youngest son was kind of doing the same things that Christians, as Steve used to say good naturedly, our sons are out misbehaving together. And they weren't really friends in doing this, but they were doing the same things. And so Steve and I would come to bishopric meeting, and the bishop was always notoriously over time with his interviews, and so we'd have time to sit out in the lobby and commiserate about our sons. And one day I found a book that Bonnie had been given. She'd been the Relief Society president, and when she was released, the sisters in the ward gave her a book, and it was called "Raising Up a Family into the Lord" by Jean R. Cook. And I can tell you that to this day, I haven't read that book, but I read part of the last chapter, which he titled "No Empty Chairs." I'm really going to get tough on this one with my emotions. But anyway, I read a verse that he had in there, or a page, and it was so meaningful and so comforting about our situation. I thought I'd share it with Steve. One thing I should tell you about Steve, he was incredible in terms of presentation. He was this eloquent speaker. He could teach a class, and he was amazing. But anyway, I shared it with him, and I can't remember that we discussed it too much outside the bishop's office, but we went into the bishopric meeting, and then about an hour and a half later, when we were done, Steve asked if he could read this thing that I'd given him. And the bishop said, of course. And so this is Orson F. Whitney. You might have heard this because I've heard it a couple of times in General Conference. Orson F. Whitney in April 1929 conference said this, I hope it's okay if I just read it. He said, "The prophet Joseph Smith declared, and he never taught a more comforting doctrine, that the eternal sealings of faithful parents and the divine promises made to them for valiant service in the cause of truth would save not only themselves, but likewise their posterity. Though some of the sheep may wander, the eye of the shepherd is upon them, and sooner or later they will feel the tentacles of divine providence reaching out after them and drawing them back to the fold. Either in this life or the life to come, they will return. They will have to pay their debt to justice. They will suffer for their sins and may tread a thorny path, but if it leads them at last, like the penitent prodigal, to a loving and forgiving Father's heart and home, the painful experience will not have been in vain. Pray for your careless and disobedient children. Hold on to them with your faith. Hope on, trust on, till you see the salvation of God." It wasn't when I first read it or when I shared it with Steve, it was he read those words back to me and the others in the room that I had the most overwhelming spiritual witness that what he was saying was exactly true. And I knew it wasn't a blank promise. It required my part to remain valiant and my wife's part. But I knew that if we did that, our son would return. There's a scripture in in Alma, where Ammon says, "My heart was brim with joy," and that's the only thing I can say about how I felt that night. I went home with my feet 6 inches off the ground and shared that good news with Bonnie. Now, it would be another 2 years. Christian and his friends got in trouble with the law. They got picked up one night, early in the morning. And I'm pretty sure the police violated their rights, but nevertheless, they searched the car and they didn't find drugs, but they found a pipe that had residue in it. And so they were charged with something, and they went to the judge, and the judge gave them 6 months probation with the understanding that if they kept their nose clean, they would have their record expunged. Well, Christian, I think, turned the corner there. He got a job. He worked at this place called, I don't know if they have them out here. I think it's a nationwide chain of restaurants called Boston Market, where they serve rotisserie chicken. Anyway, he worked there. And there was this shop down the street from us, a mile or so down the street. But one night they asked him to work at a different shop, and he had lost his driver's license in this whole process too. And so I had to give him a ride to work and then go pick him up. And on the way home, and by now I was the bishop of the ward, on the way home, he asked me this question. He said, "Dad, is it necessary that I remember every sin that I've committed and repent for each one?" And what I told him, I guess more as the bishop than the dad, but maybe both, I said, what's most important is for you to turn away from sin and turn to the light of Jesus Christ. And as you do that, you will come to know the things that you need to repent for. Well, Christian started going to church, and one day Bonnie and I were giving my first counselor a ride home, and his name is Dan, and Dan said, I think Christian's going to go on a mission. And we laughed. It was too much to ask, but sure enough, a couple of months later, Christian started talking about it, and he had counseled with another young man in the ward who had returned from a mission, who was Christian's age, and talked to him about going out as an older missionary. I mean, he wasn't like 30 years old, but he was 22 years old. And this other young man said, no, that's not a problem. There's all kinds of missionaries out there like that. So Christian served a mission. He served in the Provo, Utah mission, actually, and most of his mission was spent reactivating people or baptizing the children of the adult children of people who had been inactive in the church and had not had their children baptized, and now they wanted to learn about the religion of their grandparents. And he came home, and the week before he was supposed to give his missionary report, he asked if me and his three brothers could join him and sing a song in the meeting. Well, we're not necessarily a musical family. We do okay. We're not terrible, but anyway. So we sang, and we sang "There Is a Green Hill Far Away," one of my favorite hymns, and I'm sure I was probably crying while we sang it. But as I looked out in the audience, so many people knew Christian's story, and there wasn't a dry eye in the house. And Christian has got married in the temple. He has three beautiful children now. His oldest daughter is almost ready to be in her last year of college. So it was a long time ago, but I still remember it like it happened yesterday.
You know what I love so very, very much about this is this idea that you held on to a promise by Orson F. Whitney, and as you were serving elsewhere, then the Lord was able to come in and give you the blessing that you most desired. And and Come Follow Me in the last week or two, it was in section 31, 2, and it says, I will bless you and your family, yea, your little ones, and the day cometh that they will believe and know the truth and be one with you in my church. That's exactly what you experienced. I love that so much, and that's being brought back up to our memory, that we can lean into these promises and find peace while the Lord does his work.
Right. And I just have to say, God came forward. Well, that's the wrong way to say it, but he brought that blessing forward exactly when I needed it. So I didn't give up. So I stuck with it, and it was a very meaningful experience. And Christian is my four sons are all different from each other, and Christian has his own issues, and we talk all the time. And he was always kind of our empathetic one, who got involved with some guys who they were at church, but they were kind of shunned at church because they were sort of not in the in crowd and all that, and he became their friend, and then they were the ones that kind of led him down the wrong road and stuff. And I'm not blaming them because he's the one that made the choices. But anyway, he's doing well now, and he's funny. He lives in Brooklyn, New York, but he works in the suburbs. I mean, it's just kind of the opposite of what most people do, but they love living in Brooklyn. So anyway. Another story, and I know you're probably familiar with this somewhat, Stephanie, but our youngest son, Jordan, passed away about 11 years ago, a little more than 11 years ago. And I'd just like to tell you a little bit about Jordan. We had three sons in 4 years. They were just 2 years apart, and we were always trying for a girl. And our next door neighbors had three daughters, and their fourth one was a boy. And our friends from school, they lived elsewhere in the Salt Lake Valley. They had three boys, and their fourth one was a girl. So we thought, oh, there you go. There's the key. So Bonnie got pregnant. And this is back in the early 80s when you had to have an excuse to get a sonogram, so nobody knew the gender of the babies and stuff like that. But I think we were fooling ourselves, or telling ourselves, well, everything's so different. The way she's carrying the baby and all this stuff must be a girl. And the doctor knew of our preference and all that. But the night Jordan was born, it's funny too, because we settled on the name Jordan. We know here in Malad, our friend Larry John has a daughter named Jordan John. So Jordan John could be either way, I guess. So anyway, the night he was born, the doctor, when the baby came out, he said, "Looks like you're specializing," and so we had four boys, and Jordan was 5 years younger than his next oldest brother. He was diagnosed with juvenile diabetes when he was just 2.5 years old, and so he lived with that burden, I guess, if you want to call it, for his whole life. When he got to be older, more of like an adult in his last years of high school, when he would get low blood sugar, it would sometimes result in a seizure. And they were always ugly to look at, but didn't seem life-threatening. Jordan graduated from high school, and he enrolled at the local community college, but after I think less than a year, he decided that wasn't going to work out. So he stopped going to school, and he started working in various jobs that weren't very promising. And then he actually got a really good job with a company. I mean, it's a good job, meaning it was secure, and he had a position of responsibility. He became a manager over a shift of people that were all older than him, but they all loved Jordan because he was such a great kid and whatnot. I should tell you that during this time, he was getting lukewarm in the church too. He would say he was going to the singles ward, but he would leave the house at 10 minutes after the meeting started. So we weren't sure how much that was going. Well, I think in reality, and I'll tell you honestly, I've just recently thought of this, that Jordan realized what he needed to do. Not only he wanted to get a college degree because he felt like that was going to help him get a better job that he could, one day raise a family on and all that. And I think he realized that he needed to leave his friends because they weren't really doing him any good. And so so typical of Jordan, without telling us, he applied for and got it accepted at the University of Memphis in Memphis, Tennessee, your home state, Stephanie. And this 900 miles from where we lived in Northern Virginia. And I took him down there, and we found an apartment for him to live in. And then when he was about to start school, Bonnie and I rented a little panel van and moved all of his. He had some furniture and a few things, and we moved him down there and got him settled. And I think it was not until, for us, we realized this, and maybe he realized it before, but as we were driving away, I'm sure he thought, I don't know a single person in this town. But I think he also knew that the place he could find 20 to 30 new friends was to go to church. And so he found the singles branch and made friends there. And it turns out the branch president was a juvenile diabetic too, and so they would share war stories, and he really got involved in the church there. In September of 2012, he called us and asked if we could come down for state conference. He was going to be made an elder, and he wanted me to do the ordination. So of course we went for that. At Christmas time, he came home, and 4 days after Christmas, Jordan, Bonnie, and I, and his three brothers and their wives all went to the temple, and Jordan was endowed in the temple. It happened to be my birthday, December 29th, and I can't think of a better birthday present that I've ever had than that. Jordan went back to school, and in December of 2013, he graduated, and we went down, and he was so happy and so proud of what he had accomplished. he didn't have a job yet. And so I flew home and Bonnie stayed behind and helped him pack up his car, and they drove home together. And then Jordan was there for Christmas, and 4 days later was my 60th birthday, and a week later was our 40th anniversary, and 3 weeks later was Bonnie's birthday, and her mother and her two sisters and some nieces and came out, and two of his brothers and their families were there. His one brother Andrew moved to California at that time. It was like heaven on earth at our house. There was so much joy and happiness and fun. Everybody was having so much fun and all that. And then came February 2nd, happened to be Super Bowl Sunday, an event that I will disdain for the rest of my life because we found Jordan non-responsive in his bed. He was kind of half off the bed, and we called the ambulance. They'd been to our house many times before, and it only took them about 5 minutes to determine that Jordan was gone. And so, of course, we were heartbroken. The rest of the story, I feel a little, I don't know, selfish telling you the rest of it because this is about me and my feelings. But of course, Jordan is the center part of it. But and it's about tender mercies, I guess, especially that term in this case. All day long on the day of his death, the one thing I couldn't get out of my mind was that my son had left this life without me adequately conveying to him how much I loved him and how proud I was of him. I know I said the words before, but I just wished I had more time to make a stronger point. Another day, another hour, another minute. And we had people coming to our house all day to offer their condolences and give us support. And I shared those feelings with people, and without exception, they all said, "Oh, Jordan knew, certainly he knew," and that made me feel better. But as I went to bed that night, I felt like, these are all my friends. They're going to tell me whatever I want to hear or what I need to hear, and so I wasn't totally convinced. And so I slept better that night than I thought I would. But when you get up every weekday for 35 years at some crazy hour to get to work, you don't really need an alarm clock. And I woke up about 5 o'clock and I couldn't go back to sleep. And I guess this is part of the tender mercy, but I never thought about it this way, that as I laid there, I felt his presence in the room. I don't know if that's even doctrinally possible, but I didn't see him or hear him. I just felt his presence there. I got up a little while later and I went down, like I always did on days when I was home. I went down to the computer and I got on and read the morning paper and read my emails. And then I realized I needed to let my coworkers know that I would be gone or what had happened. And I should tell you about my coworkers. These are people that didn't know me that well because I normally worked I was working for the government at the time, General Services Administration. I normally worked at their central office, which is just a couple of blocks west of the White House. But we have 11 regional offices around the country, including one in Washington, D.C. Our central office we call the program office, and all those offices we call the project management office, or what they like to say, that's where all the work gets done. And they're probably right about that. But I had accepted an invitation to come over and work with the historic preservation people for a few months. And I'd been there just a couple of months, and I got to know, I guess, everybody in the office, but 3 or 4 people very well. And one guy, Gary Porter, was the same age as me. And so we had that in common. And then Gary is like me, one of those crazy people that likes to get up at dark 30 and beat everybody into the office and miss the traffic and all that stuff. And so we were there early and we had chances to talk and get to know each other. And so I wrote a note to Gary and 3 or 4 other people, including my boss, Nancy Witherell, and told them what had happened, that I wouldn't be to work that day or that week, and I'd have to let them know when I'd be back. And I could tell Gary was in the office early because in a few minutes he wrote back. And I'm sorry. And he said this. He said, "Dear Lamont, I'm so sorry to hear about Jordan. I always love hearing stories about your sons. Your pleasure is so obvious. And when I read those words, I I felt I knew that if Gary could tell that, certainly Jordan knew that. In the years since then, as we were getting ready to move to Idaho, I cleaned out my nightstand and I found a letter that Jordan had written me. I don't remember reading it before. It didn't have a date on it, so I don't know when he wrote it. It's probably something at Father's Day, and he wrote it in kind of poetic form like he sometimes would. And it said everything that I wanted to hear that day. That he understood that I loved him, that I had to sometimes be a hard-nosed guy on him, but he understood why. And I just am so grateful that that message came across to me at that time. It was, you know, the days and weeks following that were difficult ones without Jordan, but just with easing my mind on that aspect was so important.
Lamont, what
Yeah.
what kind of advice would you give to somebody that has lost a child or a loved one, especially, and how do you keep up a relationship with your Heavenly Father when you are mourning? And I don't know if you blamed the Lord or what that looked like, but what advice would you give?
Well, I'm glad you asked that because I felt this way for a long time. That I know a lot of people when that happens, they think God is punishing them or they're mad at God or something like that. Um, you know, I had been the bishop of the ward. I had been on the High Council. I worked at the temple. I thought my testimony was rock solid and unshakable, but I found out that day that it was weak and wanting. Bonnie had told me, actually, it's interesting. We were ordinance workers at the temple for about 17 years, and at the DC temple, and you'd think she would have told me this on the way home one night, but she waited until we had a couple of friends over at our house for a social evening, and she told them how she had one assignment in 1 hour of the shift to work in the ceiling room. And there was a young couple that came in and wanted to do ceilings for their deceased family and of their ancestors. And Bonnie said, as she left the room, she asked this couple if they saw the same thing she did. And I'm laughing to stop crying. And they said, yes, we did. And what they saw was the images of these people, maybe through the veil or something, standing next to the altar as this ordinance was done. And so I asked Bonnie to tell me that story again because my faith was weak, weaker than I thought it was. And I will tell you that every night, even to this day, every night we bow our heads and ask for reassurance that Jordan is safe and happy. And that has come to us. And my faith in the Lord has increased so much. And I feel so much closer to him because of, you know, I hate to say it because of Jordan's death, but because getting through that experience helped us so much to stay close to the Lord and to feel his promptings and let us know that he was there and that we will see him again someday. And so I would just give that advice to people. Um, I wanted to tell you one other, I'm not sure how much time we have left, but I want to tell you one other little story that kind of is related to this about how the Lord looks after you. Just before or just after we moved to Virginia, a year or so, a young family named Don and Kathy Staten and their 3 children moved into our ward. And about 2 or 3 years after they moved there, Kathy was pregnant with their 4th child and was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And the doctors told Don and Kathy that if she aborted the baby, that she would extend her life for 3 or 4 more months. And they decided that what was most important was to save the baby and to do all they could to make sure the baby was born alive. Our bishop actually gave her a blessing that she would see her son, her child, born alive. I don't know. I guess I don't know if they knew it was a son. Anyway, when Kathy was only about 6.5 months along, she was in the hospital, and the doctors came to Dawn and said, we don't think she can sustain the child anymore, and so we're going to take the baby today to see if we can save it. And he said, I don't know what will happen after that operation, and so this might be the time to say goodbye. And you can imagine what Don said to his wife and whatnot. Well, she had the baby, and the doctor had been in the room when our bishop had given her this blessing. And so when the baby was born, he held it up and said, Kathy, look at your son. And she passed away about 30 minutes later. And then, despite their heroic efforts, the baby died a day later. And so they were buried together. Well, Don, about a year later, met another woman that he got married to, and they had a couple more kids. And they moved to a different ward, but they were still in our stake. And so we would see him and his wife Lexi occasionally, but not. And then in 2016, this is 2 years after Jordan passed away, almost 3, we had a stake reorganization, and we formed a new ward that was made up of people from 3 different wards. And Don became the new bishop of that ward. And so one night he called me up and said, hey, I was wondering if I could come over and see you guys tonight. And I said, well, Bonnie's gone out west to visit her mother. And I'm here. And the bishop said, well, you're the one I want to talk to anyway. So that's great. So we set up a time, and he showed up at the appointed time. And he said to me, he said, I don't know exactly why I'm here. he said, I got a call from President McConkey. Our stake president was Taylor McConkey. He's Bruce R. McConkey's grandson, by the way. Anyway, and President McConkey knew me very well because we had served on the High Council together. And President McConkey said he got a call from Elder Gerard, who was our area authority. Now, I don't know him from Adam, and he doesn't know me from Adam, but Elder Gerard called President McConkey and said, why don't you have Bishop Staten go over and check on Brother John to make sure he's doing okay. And so the bishop showed up, and we'd known each other for over 30 years, but we hadn't really had a chance to catch up. And so we sat down and we talked. And as he said, he wasn't sure why he was there, but eventually he got to the question that we agreed was the reason he was there. And he said, are you still grieving about the loss of your son? And I said, well, I'll tell you what I tell everybody. I still feel the pain, but I don't want it to go away, because sometimes I feel like that's all I have left of Jordan. And he said, well, I'll tell you from my own experience, which of course he had. He said, I know that Jordan would want you to be as happy as you were when he was here. Such great advice from the bishop, who got a call from a servant of God who doesn't know me from Adam, but somehow got it in his, was made known to him that I needed somebody to come and talk to me. And so those are some things that have helped me to be who I am today, and where I am today. And I feel blessed. We have 11 grandkids. They're scattered from New York to Palm Springs, California, and we don't get a chance to see them all that often. We did just spend a week in Yosemite Park with the ones from California, but we still we pray for them every night and pray that they will know of our love for them. And thank goodness for my dear wife Bonnie, because she is everybody's favorite, because she always does so many nice things for them, and I just tag along so I get some of the credit. Anyway, do you
We
have
love
any?
that. No, that is such beautiful stories of just faith and just being a stalwart, disciple of Christ all the way through. I love the whole idea of just friends showing up for you along the way to kind of invite you back and bring you back and give you encouragement and speak to your heart and give you those tender mercies.
Yeah.
So, with all of that being said, and all the ups and downs with the different experiences that you've had, why do you choose to stay in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints?
Well, I hope what I've conveyed to you today is that my faith and my conversion and my testimony has been an evolutionary process over many years. being born into the church is one thing, but grasping and accepting and living all the commandments and things like that is another thing. And thankfully, God has put people in my path of life that have helped me. I often say that Bonnie, my wife, is responsible for everything good in my life. And I think that's true, but I don't want to diminish the impact of my parents, who were not active church members, but they taught me about my civic responsibilities, about being a good citizen, about being a good neighbor, about paying my bills on time. My father was such a great example of how to treat my wife as a partner and not a servant. And so I learned so much from them. And I think all of that combined has has contributed to me wanting to be in the church. But I'll tell one more little story that will tell you why I want to stay. When Jordan passed away, we had a memorial service at our ward in Virginia, and then we came out to Idaho and we had a funeral and we buried him here in the Malad Cemetery, where a plot next to where Bonnie and I will be buried someday. Um, in the audience at the memorial service were four of my colleagues at work who had never been to an LDS service before, and it was really a special time. Jordan's best friend from high school, his name is Jake, and he lived in Connecticut. He had served in the Army and had done 2 tours in Iraq. And on both tours, on each tour, he lost a very close friend who, due to an IED explosion. In fact, the last one, Jake was there. The soldiers were marching 6 feet apart, I guess, for safety reasons. Jake actually stepped over an IED, and his friend stepped on it, and Jake got shrapnel in the back of his neck and everything. And now here he is. We've asked him to come and speak at the funeral of his best friend from high school, and he was so great. He told stories of their antics, and he had us smiling and laughing and feeling good. And then there were 2 adult men from our ward who Jordan was particularly close with, who spoke and told stories of Jordan. And our friend Bruce Moore told the story of how Jordan had come over, and he had this little Chevy S10 pickup that was kind of a lowrider thing, and he bought these big speakers, and he wanted. I don't know how he ever figured they could be put into the cab, but Bruce is a handyman, and he came over and talked to Bruce, and they just concluded that it wasn't going to happen. And Jordan said to him, "Well, I knew that if anybody could do it, you could do it." And Bruce says, even in failure, he made me feel good. And so there was this great spirit. When I got back to work, which was about 3 weeks later, my boss, Nancy Witherell, nice lady, sat me down and asked me how I was doing. And then she said, they all drove together in the same car to come to the memorial service. And she said, well, we all talked about our feelings that we felt during the memorial service. And in the end, we all felt the same way. And that was that we felt happy to know that you would be surrounded by people who loved you. And that explains everything. The Lord is so wise in organizing the church into wards and stakes where we have these small congregations, and we can serve each other, and we can do the Lord's work in helping people. We get callings that we sometimes say, how am I ever going to do this? And then we do it, and we get blessed for doing that, but we also have a chance to bless the lives of other people. And I will tell you that I've had differences of opinion with most of the ward members in the church for years, but whatever those differences are, they mean nothing, because I know that ultimately we all believe in the gospel of Jesus Christ, in the divinity of the Savior, and in his blessings. And when push comes to shove, when something happens to somebody, we're all there helping out. Sometimes it's a move, sometimes it's we live up here in snow country, so people help other people, especially elderly people, get snow out of their driveway. I have a half-mile road to clear of snow, but I'm thankful that I still have the good health and the equipment to do that. But anyway, it's just that we are a family, and we love and support each other in so many ways, and that's what keeps me involved in the church, and it also my involvement there, edifies me every time I come to church and we have a lesson or we hear talks and we feel the Spirit. So that's where
Thank
I'm
you
at.
so much. That is so beautiful. And you have brought such a beautiful spirit. And I look at your loss and I look at your struggles and the hurt and the pain and the gaining of your own testimony. And it is just exactly, I think, what we need to hear today. So thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
You're welcome.
And we also invite our listeners, if you have felt the Spirit, if you have felt anything here that just was uplifting, we would love to hear that in the comments. And you can just reach out to and share this. We would love for you to share this episode with someone who might need a little bit of this light in their lives. You can find us on Anchored in Christ or anchoredpodcast.net. And you can find all the episodes there. We're just so thrilled for all the people that have come out and guests who just say, I have a story to share because Jesus Christ is my Savior and I want to be that light to the world. So we encourage you to like and subscribe to us and share comments. We love the feedback. Until next time, thanks for joining us.